Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out today on this lovely, rainy winter day. But I always say better rain than snow, unless you're a skier, in which case you probably wouldn't be here right now anyway. As everyone makes their way into the room, I just want to thank you all again for being here. I'm Claire Rosenzweig, President and CEO of the Better Business Bureau and of its Education and Research Foundation. And for the fourth time, we're doing this charity symposium. And for the fourth time, when everybody gets in here, you will see that we have another packed house, and another packed house in a very short period of time, from the time that we started doing this. As I do with every event, before we get started, I want to thank people, because these events, as many of you know, don't just happen. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort to put them together. And there are all types of contributors, so it'll take a moment. First, I want to express our gratitude and our thanks to our sponsors. You'll see them up on the screen as well, but American Express, big thank you to Tim McClyman, Richard Brown, and Cheryl Green Rosario. Bank of New York Mellon. We have a wonderful board member, Patricia Sampson, and her colleague, Mark Castle. Emblem Health, our board member, Valerie Reardon. New York Community Trust, we want to thank Pat Swan, Lori Slutsky, who was our keynote last year, and Joyce Bove. And today we have a guest from the trust, Janet Hollander. We really appreciate all of their support. Venable LLP is our wonderful workshop sponsor today, and we want to thank Jeff Tenenbaum, Rory Cohen, and Doran Martin for their generous support of the program that you'll hear in a workshop about protecting your investments post-Madoff era. I also have a big thank you to the Center here for Nonprofit Strategy and Management at Baruch School of Public Affairs. For the third time, they are providing this space to us for this event, so we really appreciate it. In particular, I want to thank our program committee, because they worked very closely with us to develop the content of today's sessions and really helped us bring it together. Ronna Brown, who you'll hear from in a minute, from Philanthropy New York. Jack Krauskopf from the Baruch College School of Public Affairs. Pat Swan from New York Community Trust. Miguel Bonilla from United Way of New York City. And Tim McClyman, Richard Brown, and Cheryl Green Rosario of American Express. Again, all of you were so helpful in putting this program together, and we really appreciate it. More organizations than ever, 14 of them, got together with us, collaborated to help bring this program to you in terms of awareness. Many of you in our audience today are with these groups, and I just want to mention them because we really appreciate your support. The Association of Development Officers, the Association of Fundraising Professionals, Greater New York Chapter, Baruch College School of Public Affairs, the Foundation Center, the Long Island Center for Nonprofit Leadership at Adelphi University, New York Council of Nonprofits, New York Society of Association Executives, Nonprofit Coordinating Committee of New York, NewYorkCharities.org, it's quite a few, huh? Philanthropy New York, Staten Island Not-for-Profit Association, United Way of New York City, Women in Development, New York, and Young Nonprofit Professionals Network, New York City. Just a few. A number of these groups have provided literature for you, and I would encourage you to take a look at it, which is out at the registration table. And of course, none of this would be possible without our incredible BBB staff. First and foremost, Luana Lewis, our Senior VP of Programs. Couldn't do it without you. She really organizes everybody and puts this all together and puts her incredible thought leadership into the process. Our interns, our volunteers who help plan the event, and they're all working here today. You'll see them running around. I encourage you, if you have any questions, go talk to them. And now, I would like to invite David Birdsell to the podium. David is Dean and Professor of the Baruch College of Public Affairs. And please join me in welcoming Dean Birdsell.
Thank you, Claire. Good morning. It's wonderful to see you here this morning. Welcome to Baruch College. We are thrilled for the third year to be collaborating with the Better Business Bureau on this important series of conversations about this sector, about effectiveness in this sector, and today specifically the issues of transformation and leadership. There is a burgeoning literature, and you see some references to it in your packets today, on leadership, on transformation, and on the need to do somewhat differently what we have long done in the face of the economic pressures that I know for a certainty every single one of us in this audience today is facing, institutionally and often personally. It creates additional demands on our organizations, and it makes it more difficult to meet those demands because of the constraints on staff, etc. I'm not going to go into that because you know the stories better than I do. How does the leadership literature, how does what we know about transforming institutions actually go into the workflow? Because one of the little nasty secrets about this is, of course, that you don't get a free pass. And you guys say, now you have 2 months to go and transform your organization and build leadership, and then you can come back at the end of it and things will be different. It's not how it works. It happens while you're still under fire. It happens while you're still trying to wrestle with problems. It happens while you're still trying to put together things that in this environment very much want to be a part. I don't presume for a moment to begin to think about, to co-opt our speakers later on to talk about what these things matter. But in the vast literature that emerges, there are at least 3 themes that we know to be important. I would just like you to think about these as you go through the afternoon. Number 1, thinking about this sector as a sector and approaching it in community. That, in fact, the histories of individual organizations become, in this case, much less important than sectoral moves, and trying to understand the movement of people between and among institutions and institutional effectiveness in a conjoint way offers many different strategic options than thinking on a single individual basis. Number 2, that it is extraordinarily important to partner with other organizations in a variety of ways. Last year, there was the topic raised of the prospect of the dreaded M words, mergers, but there are also ways well short of merger to think about partnerships, collaborations, and many organizations in this room are extraordinarily adept at finding opportunities to do more efficiently the things that we all must do together. But number 3, and perhaps this is easiest, simplest to say, and hardest to do, is to do something. At the School of Public Affairs, we embrace the notion of leadership development. We're one of the very largest schools of public policy and public administration in the United States, with now going away the largest nonprofit program at an academic institution in America. We care about this and we think about it every day. And what's very clear is that in the plethora of strategies and approaches that exist in the world and wide, we can debate them for a long time and should, because it's necessary to get it right. But it's also necessary to do something. The Better Business Bureau recognizes that. All of you here today, our speakers have ideas about how to get that done, and I am thrilled that you are here at the college this morning and through the afternoon talking about these important questions. Welcome and good luck.
Thank you, Dean. Appreciate that. And now, we've been doing these programs since 2006. And charity effectiveness has been a focus for the BBB and our foundation for a long time. 2 of our standards of charity accountability say that charities should evaluate their effectiveness and report it to their boards at least every 2 years. So that's one reason why we do so much work around this topic. But in the last year or 2, charity effectiveness, the issue of charity effectiveness has certainly become very high. The White House is interested in knowing which charities have the greatest impact, and that could lead to government dollars for some. Important foundations have revised their guidelines to focus grant dollars on organizations that can define success, measure it, and report on it. The IRS provoked a major controversy by talking about the idea of having some kind of universal indicator of a charity's efficiency and effectiveness. Charity experts have been blogging about it. It's really getting a lot of buzz. And at the same time, we're mired in a deep recession. Nonprofits and grant makers alike are looking at much smaller budgets. Cost-cutting and tough decision-making has become a way of life. We're facing even greater demands for our services. We're being asked to do more with less, and some of us may not have the resources needed to pay for this more that we're being asked to do. And in the midst of this difficulty, a strong culture of impact assessment has emerged and is growing very quickly. How should we respond to this? That's what we're here to talk about. Although we're all well aware that the debate about charity effectiveness that's all over the place now can affect our bottom lines, we have to approach this, but we have to do it without fear. We have to do it with a steadfast approach. We believe that charities and grant makers will respond with even greater creativity and innovation to do what we do best and do it even better. All of us in the philanthropic sector have a leadership role to play. We all have a part in creating greater impact. That's why our program is designed today to bring out the leader in all of us. Now, as I say that, many of you in this room are already executive directors, board members, chief operating officers, and CEOs, and others are well on their way to being that. But despite who you are, you're all leaders in your own way. Whatever your place in the not-for-profit world is, you all have impact. You all have the ability to have an effect in the world in which you're operating. And we'd like you to walk away today with new ideas that you can put to work in your jobs right away. So now, let's begin with the program. Our first speaker is certainly someone that I consider a leader. Many, you've seen that way in the world. He's also a regulator. And if you look at his bio in your kits, you'll see that he has extensive experience in the corporate and the not-for-profit worlds. Jason Lillian is Bureau Chief of the Charities Bureau, which is part of the New York State Attorney General's office. He's responsible for overseeing all the not-for-profits and their activities in our state. When I met Jason recently, he told me about his interest in encouraging strong nonprofit boards and good governance practices for charities. We've invited him today to present our opening remarks at these proceedings, to share with us his insights, and it seemed like an ideal way to start off this event. Please help me welcome Jason Lillian, Bureau Chief, New York Charities Bureau.
Claire, thanks so much. Thanks so much for inviting me. I want to commend the Better Business Bureau and all its partners and funders for putting on this program each year. I think this program provides such an enormously valuable service to nonprofit organizations throughout the sector, and I encourage you to continue the program, and I encourage you, in fact, to expand it. All of you in this room play yourselves an extremely valuable role. And the more that we can do as a sector to provide guidance and information to help you perform your jobs better, I think is a goal worth achieving. Let me just say, echo some of the remarks that the Dean just made about how difficult these times are. Clearly, you know these times, they're difficult. Giving is down. Pressures on boards, pressures on nonprofit organizations are increasing. And we have a situation in both municipal and state government today in terms of the financial positions, which quite possibly could be unprecedented. The state budget this year is going to be, I think from all expectations, a pretty difficult one. And I think a lot of organizations that have not yet experienced perhaps the effects of the downturn, unfortunately may find themselves in a difficult position soon. So I think having this dialogue today about transformation, about taking those steps that are necessary to reevaluate what you do well, to see how you can do better, and to improve what may not be working so well in order to improve effectiveness, I think is extremely important. What I think makes a lot of sense is for me to start off with how we at the Charities Bureau, the Attorney General's Office, have engaged in this exercise. We have, in fact, I think, transformed ourselves or in the process of transforming ourselves. And I think it might be instructive as a starting point. And then I'm going to share some insights with you on what I think are the key ingredients, the key requirements for effectiveness in this environment. Several months ago, the Attorney General hosted an event for nonprofits that some of you may have been, some of you may have attended. We titled it "Strength Through Partnership," because partnership is absolutely key today. And the message that we tried to bring out to state is that the Attorney General's office had to take a step back and reevaluate what we were doing. We are the regulator, but in this market, given the challenges that are facing nonprofit organizations today, how can we do more to help provide assistance to nonprofit organizations? You know, I'm not even sure if all of you are familiar with what we do. Many of you are familiar with us because nonprofit organizations are required to register with us and then file annual reports. Process for some of you is easy, some of you might be a little bit more challenging, but that's one thing we do, and I'll get into that in a second. Second, we're obviously the enforcer. We enforce the state laws dealing with nonprofit organizations, and to give you an example, recently we brought some cases primarily in the fundraising area. There was an organization called United Homeless Organization that set up these water jugs on streets throughout the city of New York, and the operation was a sham. Money was being pocketed by the workers behind the table and was not going for the homeless services the workers behind the table were soliciting the funds for. So we went to court and shut them down. Recently, we brought suits against 4 telemarketing firms that calls New York residents asking for donations for police groups, for veterans groups, for cancer victims. In many of these cases, the telemarketers were just fabricating the causes for which the money was going to be used. There were no cancer victims. Cancer programs didn't exist. Or police groups. Residents sitting at home, particularly women and elderly, were being harassed, intimidated by callers in order to raise funds. So we went to court to shut these four groups down. Recently, there was an immigration legal services organization for immigrants that promised to help get immigrants, low-income immigrants, help getting them their legitimate status. The problem is that the legal services organization wasn't qualified to provide the legal services. They weren't lawyers providing legal services. They were non-lawyers. And they were still charging thousands of dollars to these immigrants in order to help get them status that they weren't qualified to get in the first place, and often did not get. They were often given wrong legal advice. So our bureau, with the Civil Rights Bureau of the Attorney General's office, went to court to shut them down. That's our enforcement role. In addition to that, we also have a role which some of you may be familiar with. If one of your organizations wants to merge or sell a significant part of your assets, our office is involved in that process to review those papers before they file for court. Or if your organization has an endowment fund, and that endowment fund, the principal needs to be spent or invaded, our office is involved in working with the organization in terms of getting the court approval that's required. That's our traditional role. But we recognized in this environment something more than our traditional regulator role was needed. So what did we do? We transformed ourselves. We looked at ourselves and said, okay, let's take a step back. What can we do more? We started the most extensive outreach program our office has ever done. We have dozens of workshops already planned statewide on topics relevant to nonprofits where they need or could benefit from our office's assistance. We've set up training programs or workshops on registration. Thousands of organizations today are not properly registered. Why does that matter? Because the state and city, before they give grants to these organizations, check with us to see if they're registered. We want to make sure that funding flows as quickly as possible to organizations that need it. So we set up these registration workshops with computers sitting in the back of the room to work with organizations to get them compliant. Transactions. Many organizations don't even understand where to begin on transactions. What we're trying to do is bring together those in the community who've gone through a merger, who've gone through a strategic alliance, to talk to each other to talk to those who have or are still planning those, and to have representatives from our office there to explain the legal requirements associated with going through a merger, going through a sale. You need an appraisal, an independent appraisal of an asset that's being sold. Many groups don't realize that until too late in the process. Knowing that up front will speed the process up quite significantly. So we've set up these workshops. Two, I mentioned about registration. Because we want organizations to get funding as quickly as possible, we announced, the Attorney General announced in November, and we've started effective January 1st of this year, what we're calling a registration cure program. Effectively an amnesty program, but we're calling it something different. Organizations through June 30th who are delinquent in their filings, who are not properly registered, if they file their filings or properly register with us, they will be exempt from any penalties. We'll waive any penalties against those organizations. They still have to file and pay whatever filing fees are associated. We want those organizations to become compliant as soon as possible. We've developed a program called Fast Track. One of the criticisms that we were facing is that we're too slow. We're a governmental entity and we're too slow. If an organization needs to sell an asset, if an organization needs money from an endowment fund, an organization needs two organizations need to merge in order to survive, they can't wait a year for our office to review a merger, review these petitions. So we've created what's called a fast track program for financially troubled organizations. Obviously, not every organization can we review on an expedited basis. We want to prioritize, bring to the top of the list those organizations that really need the assistance, the relief, the quickest. So if an organization is financially troubled and the information on our website meets those criteria, we're going to place that organization's file at the top of the list to perform an expeditious review. We also recognize that our technology wasn't great. We had an antiquated website. We are still filing paper filings when most state agencies, many federal agencies, are moving to electronic filing. Information on our website wasn't very user-friendly. So we created a brand new website. If anyone has not looked at it, I encourage you to go to it. I think it's a terrific starting point, particularly for a state agency, where information is now much more easily accessible. We have developed a short web tutorials, online seminars on topics such as fundraising, political contributions, registration and compliance. Each year we produce a report called Pennies for Charity, which shows you how much money that is raised by telemarketers actually winds its way into the hands of charities. The book we used to produce, it was very useful. It's an extremely useful resource. The problem is the book's very large. So we created an electronic search tool. So all you have to do now is go to our website, type the name of a fundraiser. And an organization that wants to retain a fundraiser can now, very easily, go to the website, type the name of the fundraiser, and what the website will show is the results from the prior 3, 4, 5 years worth of campaigns for that fundraiser. Information to arm, educate groups before they make those decisions. So groups year after year don't go back to the same fundraiser that takes 90% of every dollar. So we are addressing technology as well. So I think what the message here with what our office is doing is we recognize we had to evaluate ourselves. We had to evaluate how we were doing our mission and be willing to accept criticism and respond to it and take some proactive steps going forward to get out in front, to think about what the sector needs and can benefit from our services as the role, in our role, not just our traditional role, but beyond that. And I think that's an important message for the groups here today. And I think this is why this topic today, Clara, I really think that you hit it, really, you were right on with this topic today about transformation, because it does require a process. It requires a process to say, okay, how are we doing? And what can we do that's better? And I think the Dean, mentioned about how, and I think Claire mentioned this as well, about how this is, how evaluating missions is very important, and it is important, and it's extremely difficult for nonprofits. I recognize that. You don't have the objective criteria that for-profit entities. You don't have a stock price, right? You don't have rating agencies watching over you and giving you grades. It's a lot, and you don't have shareholders, activist shareholders. That's why it's I think so important. I think what the Better Business Bureau does in terms of providing guidance, communicating market expectations on good governance and best practices to nonprofit groups, so important. But I think it's so important for the boards themselves, or nonprofits themselves, to try to figure out for themselves what it is they can do to evaluate their own mission. It doesn't have to be too complicated. You don't need statisticians. You don't need actuaries coming in and coming up with all different modules and on performance. Figure out what works best for your organization. Figure out what measures matter. What are the most important criteria for organization to determine success for your organization? I think it's very difficult to do this in a wholesale fashion. It really is for your organization. How are you doing? What are 3 criteria I think every board needs in order to go through that process? I think this is absolutely critical. When you talk about transformation, when you talk about effectiveness, 3 things. 1, the board is the most important thing. It all comes back to this board. I was a private sector lawyer before. I was counsel to boards. I served on boards. Now I'm in this regulator hat. It all comes back to the board. If the board is engaged, if the board is active, the nonprofit will be effective. It will be proactive. It will position the entity to transform itself. The transformation starts at the board level. If boards themselves today have historically been passive, if they've given deference to the executive director, there's a founder syndrome at the where you have executive directors or staff that were there from the beginning and the board members are new. Whatever the situation a board may find itself in, if it's historically passive or it's not as active as it could be, it's extremely important in this environment to become active. Active in oversight, understanding what's going on, ensuring there's open communication flow. What information is the board getting? It doesn't matter the size of the organization. I say this often. You could be meeting in a living room. 3 people sitting on a couch. 5 people sitting on a couch. It doesn't matter. It applies whether it's a small organization or large. What information is the board getting? A lot of organizations spend a lot of time, those mid-sized and larger ones that do this, put together these board books, lots of information in the board books, and they're mailed out. A lot of energy is placed into preparing these board books. And then you go to the board meetings, and the agenda is structured in a way that the key information that's in those board books doesn't make its way into active deliberation. So it's very important. Communication is essential. Second thing, financial prudence, extremely important. Today, be proactive in financial planning. Even if an organization has not historically been active in financial planning, time to transform itself. Get out in front. See where the organization is going to be a year from now. And make those tough decisions now. Third thing I think is absolutely critical when you talk about transformation, and you're talking about effectiveness, and talking about tracking progress on a mission, is for the board to understand its mission. You'll be amazed how many organizations board members can't truly articulate the mission. Is the mission still current? Is it still what the organization is doing or should be doing going forward? So I think understanding the mission, truly understanding the mission, is absolutely critical. Those 3, I think those are 3 absolutely necessary ingredients to any exercise for an entity to transform itself. Board engagement, financial prudence, and truly understanding the mission. Finally, just a point that the Dean mentioned, I really want to stress this again. Partnership. That is a message that can't be stressed enough. The Attorney General's Office, Strength Through Partnership was the name of our program. We are trying to live that now. We are trying to partner with the community, transform, evolve from our traditional regulator role, extend our hand to the community, and work with the sector to make the sector stronger. I think if organizations that are represented in this room today, organizations that are listening to this on tape, or organizations that will hear this in future programs, do that, learn from each other, learn what works and what doesn't work, I think it's absolutely critical for transformation to be successful as well. I look forward to meeting you. I look forward to you attending our workshops. I look forward to working with each of you in the future, and I thank you once again for letting me speak to you.
Thank you very much, Jason. BBB has a long history of partnering with the AG's office. We're proud of it. We're happy about it. We look forward to working with you moving forward with all the exciting things that you're doing. Next on our program, I'd like to mention just a couple of housekeeping notes. In your packets, you found some index cards. What we want to do there is, as the speakers are speaking, questions arise in your minds. What we'd like you to do is write them on those cards, and we'll have staff walking around the room to pick those cards up. We'll have moderators who will look through those questions, and the speakers will answer as many as they possibly can in the time allotted. You're also going to find some evaluation forms in your packets. Please fill them out. We really do use them. Today's program is a result, in many ways, of what you all said last year. So we really do listen, and we really do read it. So please do that. As you can see in your agenda, the way the program is laying out today will be in this room for our keynote speaker, one of our sessions, and then we're going to have breakout sessions down the hall. I'll tell you more about those later. But for right now, I also want you to know that we're filming. We filmed our last symposium. We're filming this one. At the end of the day, you'll all be able to see what happened today, with the exception of one of the sessions in the workshop, on our website. There is a website it's in your packet. This is a forever or an evergreen type of resource for all of you. So you can go back for each of the symposium and see what we talked about and how the evolution of this sector has been progressing. So I would urge you to do that. There's also a white paper. So lots of information for you. But now I'd like to bring up Ronna Brown, who's president of Philanthropy New York. As many of you know, she was in my spot before I got here with the BBB. And she will introduce our keynote speaker.
Good morning. Thank you, Claire, and my thanks, too, to the Better Business Bureau for putting on this program. It has been more and more outstanding each year. I also want to thank them for giving me what is truly a distinct honor, which is to introduce the keynote speaker this morning, Victor DeLuca. Vic is the president of the Jessie Smith Noyes Foundation, and the foundation supports the development of community leadership while it promotes sustainability and social justice, particularly in marginalized communities. I think what's interesting when you hear about Vic's history, and I have a few facts that I have managed to find that were not actually in the bio in the packet, which I'm really looking forward to sharing. When you think about Vic's path to becoming a foundation president, it's really an unusual path. It's not what most of us think of in the ways that foundations choose their presidents. But yet, when you think about this foundation, it makes enormous sense. Vic graduated from Montclair State University and then immediately started work as a Vista volunteer at a community organizing organization, Ironbound Community Corporation in Newark, New Jersey. He became the director and stayed there for 15 years. At that point, in early 1991, Vic went to the Jessie Smith Noyes Foundation as a program officer, and 9 years later, the board made him president. What's interesting is that while Vic was a program officer, he also had an extremely active extracurricular life. He served for 6 years on the Maplewood Township Committee and was mayor from 2001 to 2003. You might have noted when you read about this particular program, he has once again been elected mayor and is serving his 4th term on the Township Committee. I don't actually know how Vic has time to do that. I think that the community service is particularly interesting because a critical component of his foundation is encouraging people to be active in their own communities, and he is also living that by example. In addition to those 2 relatively full-time jobs, Vic does a whole host of additional activities. He's on the advisory board for the Diversity and Philanthropy Project, a national project that is focused on embedding diversity in the philanthropic community. He serves on the Council on Foundations Committee on Family Philanthropy. He served 2 terms on the board of the Funders Network for Population, Reproductive Health and Rights. He is the founding and current board member of the New Jersey Citizen Action, and he is on the board of Springfield Avenue Partnership, a local economic development organization. And then, on top of all of that, he is also my board member. He has served on the board of Philanthropy New York for 5 years. And in that role has led several different committees, has been an extremely active and engaged board member. His day job, with all of this other aside, is, as I said, the president of the Jessie Smith Noyes Foundation. I know we're going to hear more about the foundation and his work in a moment, but I would really like to encourage everyone to look at the foundation's website at some point this week. I think it is an absolute model for foundation transparency. They have on their foundation their investment philosophy and their investment policy. They provide significant details about their grantees. And in addition to that, they have recently undergone an evaluation process, and they have put essentially an executive summary and notes from that evaluation on their website. This, as you all know, is not typical, but I think it is laudable and something that we should all pay attention to, so I encourage you to look at it. When Vic talks to us about transforming communities through leadership, we know that it's not only his philosophical point of view, it's not only the work he does in his foundation, but it is also the way that he has lived his professional life. So please join me in warmly welcoming Vic DeLuca.
Thank you, Ron. I'm just glad you didn't say everything that I do. Well, I have to say, after listening to the Dean, Dean Birdsell, really, you said it all. I was just going to come up here and say what these guys said. You know, it comes down to thinking of us as a sector and partnering and doing something. So I'm going to try to, I guess, a little bit of piling on that theme. Also, Mr. Lillian, his recommendations, I think, are right on, and hopefully we will get some time after I give you a few comments that we'll be able to take some questions. I'm going to really be looking if you're writing questions, because that means that what I'm saying is sparking your interest. I did think it was kind of interesting that I'm the third white guy to come up here to speak. And I was thinking of this as the sort of a title of a sitcom, the dean, the regulator, and the foundation guy, giving you the message. But let's see if we can go through this. Again, I want to thank you for asking me to speak today. Here, oh, there you are, Claire. Okay. These sure are interesting times, and I'm glad to be here to share some insight that I might have. Like all of you, I've never experienced anything like this in my almost 60 years on this planet. And there's so much to talk about. I hope that I can get you to really agree with me on some things and hopefully disagree and get those cards going. As Rana said, I started my journey back as a VISTA volunteer in 1974 in Newark's Ironbound. And at that time, VISTAs were sent by the government to go into low-income or poor communities to organize residents, to bring about the changes that they thought were important to their lives. I was on a front line of a vibrant community organization. We did service programs, we did organizing, advocacy. Our funding came from everywhere: the government, foundations, individuals, fees for service, contracts. It was really a fascinating time in the 70s. The nonprofit world was really just growing, and we were trying to deal with all the problems that seemed to be intractable that were facing our society. I believe then, as I believe now, that power should be in the hands of people, and that an organized community is necessary to ensure that the public and private sector respond to our needs. I then shifted from that role after actually 16 years there in Newark and came to the Jessie Smith Noyes Foundation as a program officer. It was kind of interesting. When I went for an interview, they told me, we're looking for a generalist, and I says, well, you got one. I can be general about anything. And what was interesting is after working so many years in an urban setting, the program that I did work on was sustainable agriculture. So I got to go around the country walking on all these farms and going to places that I never thought I would get to. But our foundation, I'll just give you a little commercial about it. This is our 63rd year. We were formed in 1947 by Charles Noyes. Charles Noyes made his money in commercial real estate here in New York City. He was very well known in the real estate circles, known as the Dean of Real Estate. And he set up the foundation in honor of his wife, Jessie Smith. And for the first 40 years of the foundation, we did scholarships and fellowships. And what was interesting was back in 1947, Charles Noyes decided that half the scholarships would go to non-white students. And I have to tell you, we've been looking at things and we can't figure out exactly why, other than just a fundamental belief that he had in fairness and trying to tap the next generation of leaders, no matter where they came from. So that is the basis upon which we do all of our work, is this consciousness of race and equity. And today, we no longer do scholarships. For the last 25 years or so, we have been funding organizations and have taken a really hard effort at trying to make sure that our dollars get into communities of color. We still fund sustainable agriculture, and I still walk on those farms. It's an exhilarating experience. We fund toxics and environmental justice. We fund reproductive rights. And we also fund here in New York City a small, essentially a community organizing program. We fund nationally, and you will find out as you talk to funders that when you meet a funder like me, you meet a funder like me, because all of us are so different. Generally say, when you meet one foundation, you've met one foundation. But I can tell you that the foundation world is I know there's some funders out here, and I think they can attest to this. It's just a fascinating opportunity to really learn about what's going on out there, to see so much terrific work. And that was really special for me in going from an activist community to a funder community, was really to build on what I learned and really move in my personal journey was to move from a doer to an enabler, to actually be able to fund folks so that they can do the work. And although I do know that there's some funders who still think that they're doing the work and they get a little meddlesome in your affairs, but we won't go there just yet. But there's one other thing I wanted to say, it's a little bit of a bragging, that I share a couple of things with Barack Obama. We're both elected officials and we're both community organizers, former community organizers. And there's one little difference here, and I think it's a little ironic. When I was an organizer, I was paid by the federal government, and now I'm a president and I'm paid by a nonprofit. When he was an organizer, he was paid by a nonprofit, and now as president, he's paid by the federal government. But I'm really glad to be here in the nonprofit community. Published reports say that there's 1.4 million of us that have registered with the Internal Revenue Service. We're very diverse. We range from hospitals and arts groups to chambers of commerce and veterans posts. We are service providers, advocacy organizations. Some of us are foundations. The Urban Institute estimates that the nonprofit sector accounts for 5% of the nation's gross domestic product and 10% of its employment. According to the World Bank, in 2006, the nonprofit sector would have been the 16th largest economy in the world. Now, some of those numbers probably have changed some, but they're still very powerful. And change is the word. Last month in my annual letter to Noyes grantees, I wrote about the hope we had in beginning 2009 with a new administration and the opportunity for new ideas. but how that hope was tempered by the collapse of our economic system that inflicted so much pain and suffering on people across this land. Now, last week we celebrated my father's 85th birthday. And he grew up in the Great Depression, and if you have fathers or mothers who did that, you know that there's always stories about what it was like and how difficult it was. The Depression changed forever the way in which people went about their lives and thought about their future. The economic upheaval today is no less devastating. In the last 2 years, over 8 million jobs have vanished. Almost 15 million Americans today are unemployed, 40% of them for more than 6 months. The Council on Economic Advisors foresees a 10% unemployment rate for the balance of this year, and when we go into next year, we only get down to 9%. And this is staggering. To have full employment in this country, we would need to create 400,000 jobs every month for the next 3 years. Feeding America, the National Food Bank Network, they reported that 37 million people, about 1 in 8 Americans, sought emergency food assistance last year. That was a 46% increase from 3 years earlier. 30% of those folks who went to get assistance are already receiving food stamps. The National Alliance to End Homelessness, they estimate that 1.5 million additional Americans will experience homelessness over the next 2 years. 1 in 6 homeowners is underwater. That's essentially that you owe more on your mortgage than your house is worth in value. In 2008, the cumulative loss of equity in U.S. homes across this country totaled $3.3 trillion. If we feel poorer, it's because we are. The government reported that American families lost 18% of their wealth in 2008, more than $10 trillion. Economic fear has gripped the country. Families are sitting at the kitchen table, making decisions as to which bills to pay, knowing all too well of how difficult it is living paycheck to paycheck. Essentially, we have stopped spending, and that doesn't work in an economy designed to grow through mass consumption. And that's why the government stepped in with the stimulus programs. But more needs to be done, and I'm afraid, given the political paralysis in Washington, it seems unlikely, although yesterday there was a bipartisan effort to pass a jobs bill. Maybe that's a sign. But we still have some big hurdles. We have dysfunctionality in the states. No offense. Where's our regulator from New York? No offense. But, California, New York, New Jersey, they don't work anymore. And to top it all off, we have the right-wing media and the Tea Party folks who are taking advantage of the fear that's out there to advance their agenda of shrinking the government, eliminating its programs and services, and attacking public workers. These are game-changing times. These are game-changing times. And it's naive to think that once the recession is over, we'll return to business as usual. Just like the 1930s that my dad grew up in, our lives have changed forever, and our vision of tomorrow is murkier. So where's the nonprofit sector in all this? Well, just like those families, we're sitting around our tables trying to figure out what to do next. The Bridgespan Group found that 93% of nonprofits felt the impact of the economic downturn, and over 80% experienced funding cuts. In response, we reduced or eliminated services, we tapped our reserve funds, we implemented furloughs and made layoffs. Sadly, at the same time that we were shrinking our capacity because of these forces, our demand for services was increasing. The foundations are in no better shape. Roughly $150 billion in assets disappeared in 2008. Gone. That's an amount equal to foundation giving for the prior 4 years. In 1 year, the assets just written off the books. On average, assets of foundations fell by more than a quarter in 2008. And as most of you know, or hopefully if you don't, you'll know now, that due to multi-year asset averaging, the impact of 2008 losses will be felt going forward. When foundations take that number from 2008 and plug it into their formula, whether the formula is a 3-year average, 5-year average, monthly rolling average, whatever it is, that number is going to drag down the amount that they're going to send out in their payout. And that's going to be for 2010 and 2011, and we'll see what happens in 2012. At the Noyes Foundation, our assets dropped closer to 30%. Like most of you who run nonprofits, I tried to do the easiest things first. We cut back on travel. We lowered our health premiums by becoming more self-insured. We decreased the number of days we cleaned our office. We brought in subtenants to help us with the rent. And for 6 months last year, I actually did a cost-sharing program with a program officer with the New York Foundation. We shared the salary of a program officer. Unfortunately, we had to reduce our grants this year by 19%, or $520,000. It meant that we're not adding any new grants this year for 2010, and I'm not sure what we're doing for 2011. As an experiment this year, to save money, we're having our July board meeting via the phone and the internet, as opposed to having to fly everybody and put them up here. Just like you, we're shifting our paper communications to electronics to save whatever we can. But we've decided so far not to reduce staffing, believing that the staff, the people that we've invested in, constitute the intellectual capacity of our organizations. And I think that's a very important thing that you're going to have to think about to try to grapple with this. Because your capital, many times, really consists of your people that work there. We have offered, this year in particular, because we've kept the staff on, we've made a deliberate effort to offer our organizational development knowledge and experiences to our grantees who may think it's useful for them. The bottom line for us is that we're going to try new ways to do things more effectively and efficiently, however we can. But unfortunately, the kinds of changes that I'm talking about, and the kinds of changes that nonprofits have taken to control costs in the past, are good in normal times, but insufficient nowadays. The uneasy feeling and uncertainty about the future is still there. It bobs parallel to the ups and downs of the stock market and the monthly unemployment reports. The conditions we face force us to look beyond what is easy and pleasant and make difficult and painful changes that will transform our organizations and the sector as a whole. We have to look within ourselves to challenge our assumptions and the way in which we do our work. I had to face this in 2009, wearing my other hat as mayor of Maplewood, New Jersey. I should just give a little commercial for that. Maplewood is a community of 24,000 people. It's a wonderful community. If anybody wants to move there, see me after this. It's got terrific government. But we're challenged, like any municipality, whether it's New York City or Maplewood, New Jersey. We're challenged. And for the past 5 years, I struggled with the Maplewood budget, which essentially was because we had an imbalance between our revenue and our expenses, not unlike most of us. You got so much coming in, you got stuff going out. In most years, just like a nonprofit, we patched things together, we squeezed out dollars here or there. We did one thing you don't have the ability to do. We raised taxes. We did it to a level that we thought was tolerable. But when we came to the budget process in 2009, everything was different. The incremental changes that we had done in the past would no longer suffice. We couldn't take any more money out of taxpayers because they just didn't have it. You know, I come to New York every day and I'm noticing on the train more and more seats, more and more parking available at the train station because less and less people have jobs. You hear the stories about who's being laid off or who has a responsibility to lay off people. Things were just going downhill. So we didn't have the ability to go out and say, well, let's just take some more money from folks. People didn't have the money. So it forced us to really think hard about what we were doing. So in mid-January, I realized that the rules of the game had changed, and I did something that I thought I'd never do. I gathered my 4 colleagues on the governing body, and I said, we have to be bold. The same way of doing things was not going to work going forward. The framework upon which we had operated in the past had fundamentally changed. We needed to change too, and we needed to do it right then and now. We built a consensus for a future of our community. We communicated to the public, providing them with a positive, clear, and firm plan for action, and we sought out and won their support. We said cuts would be made. We would be fair, but that the pain would be spread across the board. And I know there's some folks from Maplewood here, so hopefully you can check with them to see who that was, because that's what happened. 27 people lost their jobs. We terminated. Half a dozen, we changed their hours to full and part-time. 150 employees were given 12 unpaid furlough days. Municipal offices were closed on certain days, and some services were provided differently. This was very difficult for me personally. I'm a pro-government, pro-union guy. For more than 30 years, I marched with union members, fighting for fair contracts and working conditions. Now I was laying off employees, sitting across the table from terrific people, telling them that their jobs were gone or their paychecks were being reduced. State union leaders gave me an earful. Even my brother, who's the president of a firefighter union in another town, he had a lot to say. But our choices were limited, and the stakes too high to do nothing. Because of the significant changes we made in 2009, our 2010 budget is now sustainable. Our operation of government is back on course. We don't have layoffs. We did keep the furloughs in place for 1 more year. But our revenue now is closer in line with our expenditures. And we're looking for ways to do government differently. We just agreed to a merger with a neighbor town to share our municipal court services, and we're talking about sharing our fire services and our recreation programs. We've put things on the table that never reached the table before. Our goal is to continue reinventing the manner in which we run government, and even when economic times do get better, we will always remember these days and plan accordingly. Now, I don't want you leaving here saying, well, that guy down there was saying go back and lay off people. I'm not saying that. In fact, I'm saying that that should be the last thing to do. But what I am suggesting to you is that this is the time when the survival of your organization will ultimately depend on the strength of your leadership. It doesn't matter what you do in your organization. As Claire said, I think Claire said it, you're a leader here. And your organization is going to survive based on what you do. Your constituents, your members, your clients, your staff, they want to know what you're planning to do, not only to survive in the short term, but to prepare for the future. And this is more than installing compact fluorescent lights to save a few dollars or cutting back on phone lines. What I am suggesting is a top-to-bottom scrub to make sure your priorities are correct. Your organization will need to ask itself what it does best, what impact it makes. Are there other and better ways of doing the things it does? This organizational introspection will be essential to convince funders that they should continue to invest in you. And you can believe that funders are going to ask for that plan. Every one of them is going to want to know how you're getting through the current situation and what you're planning to do in the future. But when that funder does ask you for what your plan, to tell them what your plan is, ask them about theirs. During these times, it is critical to keep the lines of communication open between nonprofits and funders. For nonprofits, if you have not heard from a funder about its plan for the next 2 years, take the initiative and get the information. Don't sit back. For funders, if you have not told your grantees what you are thinking and planning to do, you should make your intentions transparent. And if you're still figuring things out as a funder, let your grantees know. Silence only perpetuates the power imbalance that exists between grantees and funders. At Noyes, we were faced with this. We were making decisions that clearly were impacting our grantees. So we decided to have a conference call of all of our grantees. We did 2. When we started making decisions in 2008, we had one then. We had a call in November, the end of the year. We explained what we were going to do in 2009. When the market didn't go up like we wanted it to, we had to make some more decisions. And we had another call in August. We had like 100 folks on the phone. And we just let them know what we were going to do. We explained what our plan is. We asked them if they had questions. We asked them if they had any suggestions. We also use our website, as Rana mentioned, to try to be as transparent as possible what our plan is. But beyond the plan, your funders are going to drill down on the impact. What is the impact your organization is making? With dollars being so tight, you will need to be absolutely clear as to the vision and mission of your organization and how you will bring about the changes you desire. You can call them outputs, outcomes, social return on investments, or whatever you want. But the bottom line is you need to be upfront about your achievements, you need to show them in measurable terms, and make the case as to how your organization makes a difference. Now, someone mentioned the M word, mergers. Let me talk a little bit about mergers and acquisitions. I happen to believe that funders have no business forcing or requiring nonprofits to merge. I do think, though, that we have a role in helping organizations think through these options, and if it makes sense to them, we have a role in making it happen. With Noyes, we have a New York City grantee right now that's considering merging. They've been in a discussion for a year, and it looks like this year will be it, and we will provide as much support as we can. I think the organic way of having mergers or even acquiring parts or some of an organization is the right way. It should not be imposed from the foundation side. I think the reason I say this is another opportunity to do an internal reality test to make sure that you are the best provider of a service or have sufficient capacity to work on an issue. Now, I've been there, and I know that we all want to do as much because we have needs in the community and because people say, why don't we do these programs, and we get funded for a while. But I've also known, in my experience, and I've seen organizations that really should think about getting out of some of the programs and services that they fund, because there are better organizations that do that. These are the times to have those real serious conversations internally and with others to make sure that what you're doing is really the best that you can do. And if there's somebody else who can do it better, it doesn't matter how big your organization is. This is not a big ego thing. It's about delivering services to people that need it or trying to do things that improve people's lives. And it's time that we think through. And if it takes reinventing your organization, this is the time to do that. Now, as I say that to you as the nonprofit community, let me say the same thing to the funders. In funder circles, I've raised the possibility of doing everything from sharing space and staff with others, and even suggested that we consider merging. Foundations too have to look at changing the way we do things. We're independent. We like to, the big ego thing. We like our name out there. This is not the time for that to happen. It's time for funders to do the same thing, to think about mergers to think about acquisitions. You know, it's ironic for a sector, the funders, who like to think of themselves as risk takers and being on the cutting edge. The way we set up our shops is a pretty traditional way. Let me make 3 other points, and then we'll get to your questions. First, let me get a drink of water. I didn't see anybody writing down. I hope you're there. I hope you're with me. Okay. First, in these times, I think it is essential that nonprofits engage in the public policy arena. Now, I'm not talking about the annual trips you take to the appropriations table to justify funding, but rather coalescing across interests and silos to be involved in the making of policy. Now, there are far better experts than I who can tell you what you can't and can't do as a nonprofit. Alliance for Justice has tons of stuff there you can get in Washington. But there's a whole lot you can do before you tip that balance, and you ought to be doing it. We need to create a narrative about the importance of our sector, describing who we are, what we do, why we do it, and how it makes a difference. We need to speak on the issues that are important to the people we serve, issues like health care reform, the future of Social Security, immigration reform, and No Child Left Behind, and there's dozens of others. The lack of government action cannot be tolerated because it hurts the very people that we serve or say that we represent. Collectively, the nonprofit sector is a powerful force that needs to actively participate in discussions about redefining the social compact. And if you don't think that discussion is happening, then you're reading the wrong newspapers or watching the wrong news. There are people out there who want to do away with the kinds of things that we're doing. Here's another part that goes right up against that. There are people who think we do away with government and that we'll pick up the pieces. But I think we have to send a message to our elected officials that government's role is to provide for the common good and that their responsibilities cannot be shifted to the nonprofit sector. You don't have to be a big government Democrat like me to agree that nonprofits do not now and will never have the resources or capacity to supplant government. Government must survive, it must provide, and we need to be there to make sure that they do that. And I just add one other thing. I think somewhere along the line we need to say that the nonprofit sector is an ideal candidate to help sustain and create jobs through future stimulus dollars. I think it's appalling that state, county, and city officials hoarded all those dollars that came out of Washington and just ignored the nonprofit sector. Folks talk about small business development as being the engine of our economy. Well, what about the nonprofit sector? No one's going to give it to us. We're going to have to go out there and make the case and win that argument. Second, even in the best of times, we have work to do to nurture and expand the public support for the nonprofit community. People know of us primarily through transactions, as clients, participants, audiences, members, donors. We need to better explain the value proposition we offer to improve our communities, the nation, and the entire world. Let's get the public to better understand their investments in us and see that in addition to being receivers of their generosity, we are contributors to a healthy economy and society. Now, this job becomes more difficult each time a major scandal involves a charity or foundation. The public's near unanimous support for our work has been shaken. A Harris poll in the summer of 2006 found that only 10% of Americans strongly believe that charities, quote, are honest and ethical. And 30% felt that nonprofits were off in the wrong direction. Now think Toyota. Here was a brand that consumers highly respected. It had a reputation for quality and being ahead of the curve. The hybrid it produced was the first to really be accepted by Americans. Now, mistakes, missteps, some innocent, some on purpose, have tarnished Toyota for years to come. Well, think about the nonprofit sector. We've had our challenges too. United Way, Red Cross, Nature Conservancy, James Beard Foundation, and others. And as we speak today, there's a federal investigation of the New Directions Local Development Corporation, a nonprofit closely affiliated with New York political figures. If there was ever a time to shine the spotlight on ourselves, it is now, when dollars are tight and giving decisions more competitive. We must hold ourselves to the highest standards of excellence and professionalism and call out those who abuse this privileged position. We need to follow the independent sector's principle for good governance and ethical practice, and Philanthropy New York's in the public trust. As leaders, we have to renew the ethical core that runs through our organization, stressing a sense of purpose and responsibility for the greater good over private interests. And if we allow our sector to be tarnished by the few, or we are too timid or reluctant to police ourselves, then shame on us. We deserve the type of regulation that is being discussed in Congress and state houses across the country. Third, the nonprofit sector, particularly the foundation side, is being questioned, and I think correctly, about its will and ability to adapt to the changing demographics in our country. The Census Bureau reports that in 20 years, the population of Americans 35 years and under will be a majority of people of color. In 2040, the United States will be a majority of people of color 10 years sooner than previously estimated. Philanthropy New York's 2009 study benchmarking diversity found that 70% of CEOs and 67% of boards of nonprofits are white. For foundations, whites make up 84% of CEOs and 83% of boards. For our sector to survive and to harness public support going forward, we need to better reflect the richness and diversity of our populace. I think morally we have a responsibility not just to service communities of color, but also to make sure that those who live in those communities are sitting at the decision-making table. And if you don't buy the moral argument, that's okay. Think about the business case. It makes complete sense to cultivate relationships with a new generation of public and private sector leaders, the majority of which in the future will be people of color. How will change occur? It will only occur if the leadership of nonprofit organizations at the board and staff levels take clear and deliberate steps to put a value on diversity and make it a reality. In 2010, the whiteness of our sector that we have seen demonstrated from study after study is unacceptable. Those of us in leadership roles should embrace the responsibility of building inclusive organizations and making the nonprofit community more reflective of what our country will look like in the future. As we experience these difficult times, it makes absolute sense to me to invest in a public sector of having people who are going to be the leaders of our country, understand what we do and support what we do and give donations for what we do. This may be a step we can take as the retirement bubble hits in the next couple of years, but it's certainly an opportunity that we can't miss. So, I'm going to give you the bottom line. Just want to make sure what was up there. Look, if you're a leader in this sector, you're trying to make society better, or you're trying to improve someone's quality of life. We have a responsibility to more than adapt. We have to prosper in the time when the cards are stacked against us. We can do this. This is the opportunity for us to become stronger to become more nimble, and to be more effective. When you leave here today, your task is to go figure it out. Our sector is resilient, and our leadership is sound. We can and must do this. We can and must reinvent what we are going to be going forward, because so many people count on what we do. We're there for them every day, each day, and they want us there now, and they want us there in the future. And it's up to us to take those very difficult steps now so that we can preserve ourselves, prosper, and grow to meet the needs that will come down in the future. Thank you very much.
Distinguished lecturer from Baruch, Jack Krauskopf, to join us. We have invited him to moderate your questions. I expect to see all of you writing on those index cards, and we'll send staff around to pick them up from you. We have about 10 minutes, 15 minutes for your questions.
Oh, boy.
Let's start with the one I've got.
Okay. Is it your question?
No.
Okay.
Very sobering and good advice, and I hope we're going to get some good questions to
Okay.
get you to fill it in. There appears to be a trend toward creating public-private partnerships between government and foundations. Since government has the power to tax citizens, why should government be turning to philanthropy for financial assistance? And the question goes on, but in the interest of brevity, you take that.
Even the smallest government is just full of bureaucracy and nothing gets done quickly. And many times it is an outside influence that has resources and both, money, resources, and people that can really push government to do it. I think the fine line here is making sure that philanthropic resources are not going to replace public dollars. But I do think that there's a role for the nonprofit sector to be much more of a risk taker, to be an experimenter, that just the government is not able to do. It's just not in the DNA of most people in government. This is not a put down on government, but the government has a particular track to run on, and it needs sometimes a push from the outside, and money is one of those things that does push government to pay attention.
So another along those lines, how can we campaign to get more assistance from the federal government?
Well, I have to say one thing about the Obama administration that I'm disappointed in. They come with these terrific credentials in nonprofit life. They served on boards. Obama was on the foundation boards. They've talked a pretty big game about working with nonprofits, but it really hasn't trickled down yet. Now, there is the Office of Social Innovation, and maybe that's where we're going to see it. But I do think that we need to pressure, I would say, the Obama administration. Quite honestly, I don't think we're going to get much support from senators and congresspeople because they've been there for a while. I think that the new thinking is going directly to the Obama administration and some of his people to really challenge them to live up to their own heritage, and that is working and living through the nonprofit community and trying to get them directly to see those linkages.
What should organizations do to grow their funding base? Should we wait to apply to foundations or start to build relationships for the future? Are foundations open to that?
Well, you've seen one foundation, you've seen one foundation. I think you have to size up the foundations. Even with us, we're not making, as I said, we're not making any grants in 2010. But we're not telling people not to talk to us. Because at some point, we're going to be making grants again. And, one of the things that I say, and some of my colleagues get a little irritated with me, is that we have to remember on the funding side, that our business is giving away money. That's what we do. And sometimes I think funders get a little confused about worrying about assets as opposed to giving away grants. Our business is to give away grants. We make investments in the nonprofit community. Without you, we don't exist. So I think you have to remember that even in this difficult time, foundations still have to make grants. The 5% requirement that foundations make grants has not gone away, so we still have to do that. I think there's time here to build relationships, time there to understand what's going on. The most important part is communication, understanding what foundations are thinking about, what they're planning, and to be prepared so whenever those decisions get made so that you're there. I would not rely on foundation grants. I think you need to diversify your funding. We tell all of our grantees to diversify their funding. Some folks are reluctant to look in their communities because they think there's not the wealth there. But I think you'd be surprised sometimes when you look in your community what you'll find. And I think a good mixture of outside resources, internal resources from your community or your sector is the way to move forward. But don't give up on foundations. We're still going to be there. This is all going to pass at some point, and we're going to start making grants again. But we are going to ask tougher questions.
I'm going to put a couple questions together. I feel we've already done many of the things you suggest in terms of determining priorities, focusing on core mission, layoffs, furloughs. Given that we will also need to continue this, can you speak about what we as leaders can do to maintain morale? And then another question, but in many ways related, how do we get a better image in the press?
Well, didn't you have Stephanie Strum here a couple of years ago? You should make sure she comes back to all these things. The press is hard. Let me go to the second part first. The press is hard. The industry press is easy. It's, you want to land stuff in the New York Times. That's the standard that a lot of people use, as to whether or not it's newsworthy, because that kicks off, believe it or not, you get on the day book of these radio shows and the TV shows, whatever they see coming out of the New York Times, that's what attracts all these others. So I think, again, it goes back to creating a narrative as to what the sector is. Too many times we go to the media with our piece. We say, come and look at our great organization, and then we forget to tie that into this tremendous network that exists out there of nonprofits and what collectively we are doing to make this city better or wherever we're working better. So I think we have to do some thinking about how do we tell our individual story, but tie that into the bigger picture so that we're always framing it. The Chamber of Commerce does it pretty easy. They talk about these small business. They'll give you a picture of, the guy working at the hardware store, the dry cleaner. And they talk about, the small business people of America are the really, as I said earlier, the backbone of our job creation. Well, we got to do that with the nonprofits. We got to say that, our nonprofit here is working here, but we are part of this 1.4 million network of organizations across this country that are making a difference in people's lives. On the morale stuff, I think just a couple of quick things. Communication is key. People who work in your organizations are afraid they're going to lose their jobs. Let's face it. Because they're seeing relatives lose their job, they're seeing the private sector going down. They are afraid. And you need to be honest with them, but you also need to present this as you're doing whatever you can to think through this. And if it does come to where your programs are being cut or people are being laid off, you need to be out there. You need to have broad shoulders. You need to have your board committed to this. I think one of the things that saved us in Maplewood in 2009 was five elected officials is like herding cats. And I was able to keep them together on message, on point, and that's very important. Just have a message, be consistent with your message. You don't treat one sector, one group in your organization different than another, one individual different than another. It is not an easy thing to keep morale up, but you have to work at it. Those are communication, being there, being accessible, being sensitive, trying to help people, always looking for the future. Put out a vision for the future. That whatever we're going through right now, at the end of this, we're going to be a better organization, a more nimble organization. We're going to continue to do the things that are important to the people that we care about.
That's a good point to end on. There are many more good questions, but I don't think we have time.
Okay.
Getting the high
Thank
sign
you.
here.
That was great. I wish we had an hour. I think we could just keep going on and on. And again, I just want to thank you all. There's another point I just want to say as representing the BBB. Please be sure, also take a look at the 20 Standards of Charity Accountability. Great guidelines for any organization to follow when we're talking about how to move forward in ethical ways. So I just draw your attention to that. We are ever so slightly behind, so what we're going to do is there's refreshments out in the hall. Please enjoy, but then come right back in, and we're going to start with our panel. I'm going to say in about 7 minutes, so quick turnaround, talking about transformation, right?